pride in the Bible has several root words, both in the Hebrew and the Greek, which are translated to what we have as pride. These Hebrew-Greek words are various within their forms, but they kind of get combined to give us some other words that are similar to pride. Things like haughty, vain, boastful, arrogant, disdainful, or high-minded, etc. So there are several things that kind of point to the sin of pride that might not have the word pride. And at the same time, because of the difficulty within the Hebrew and the Greek of having multiple words, maybe we miss some of what is prideful and what is not. Or maybe we brush past certain things that are prideful, not seeing them as wrong or as something that might separate us from God. And because there are many words to describe the different manifestations and shapes of pride, it kind of gets confusing as to what its true meaning is. However, the kind of true meaning of pride is a culmination of all these things. In fact, in the Old and the New Testament both, you get a little glimpse as to some of the different things that are used here to point out what is prideful. For instance, in the Old Testament, several words are used in the Hebrew that mean pride. For instance, statements like to mount up or to rise, or maybe to rise against God, to rise against something, to be prideful. To be insolent or to swell or to be high up. To appear above or to ascend. Or some, which is a very tricky one in my opinion, to aspire to majesty or haughtiness or to presume. Each of these in the Old Testament is used as a way of just simply describing pride. Each of these things are seen within the Old Testament as different phrases which point to the same conclusion, which is a building up of oneself or the building up of a nation, a particular group of people or a specific person. In the New Testament, in the Greek, there's several Greek words as well to describe what means pride within our own language. But to kind of summarize those is simply to inflate or to boast and brag or to consume without fire. In the same way that smoke rises, it's the same concept of prideful, this building up or this billowing in a rising fashion. And so when you ask me, okay, well, what does the Bible say about pride? It's a little bit of a tricky question because there are multiple statements that point to the word pride, both in the Old and the New Testament, some of which do not overlap necessarily in our minds as being what is called pride. But the Bible has much to say about each of these things, and we're going to kind of break those down as we get to them. All these words are used to simply describe the sin of pride. The word gives us a picture or an idea of what pride is, but not necessarily how specifically it is sinful. But basically, the sin of pride occurs when we, in some way, leave or refuse to occupy our proper place in God's design. For instance, one of the things that we talked about in ladies' Bible class today, we talked about Moses. And one of the issues, or the main issue with Moses, wasn't necessarily that he had struck the rock when he was told to speak to the rock. It's that he took matters into his own hands, did things his way, and then sought for the praise himself. Maybe not in the way that we would think he was seeking after praise, but he said, we referring not to God, not even to Moses and God, but unto Moses and Aaron. And so instead of giving proper praise unto God, Moses, through his pride, kind of began to take some of the focus away from God and to put things on him, which of course results in Moses' inability to enter into the promised land, and results in him not being able to go and finish that journey which he had started with the people of Israel. So pride kind of comes up in different ways throughout the Old and the New Testament, but the basic mindset for how we can understand pride is when we try to place ourselves improperly or outside of the realm of God's design for us, and we try and take matters into our own hands. Now here's where it gets fun a little bit. Pride is usually examined in multiple different ways within our lives. It's not just one specific way that say, okay, this person is prideful in this manner. It presents itself in multiple different ways and multiple different situations, and even takes on the look of multiple different things. For instance, the first way in which we exhibit pride is when we improperly estimate our own worth. Romans chapter 12 in verse 3 states, "For I say, through the grace given unto me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith." Of course, Paul, through inspiration, is writing to this message to the church at Rome, which was struggling with various issues. One of those issues, of course, was trying to go back to the old law, something that continued on time and time again. Of course, they were facing persecution, this, that, and the other. Some of the Roman brethren were not leaving their old, not necessarily the old law, but the old nature of themselves. They were still living sinful lives and yet wanting to be seen as faithful. And so Paul describes it in this way: do not think too highly or more highly of oneself than you ought to think. Or another way that we might word that is putting more worth upon ourselves than we actually are worth or capable of. We often read or hear about people who have low self-esteem and many problems that this personal condition causes. Pride is the opposite problem. A proud person has too much of esteem for himself. And this is shown in a variety of ways, whether that be arrogance, boasting, self-righteousness, or haughtiness. For arrogance, this is when one's rights are primary over another. For instance, arrogance says that my rights are more important than your rights, that my ability to do something is far more important than your ability to do something. It seems as if this teaching should be, or the idea of arrogance should immediately be thrown out in the mind of the Christian. Why? Because the mind of the Christian is supposed to be focused on that which was the mind of Christ. The mind of Christ was focused upon not focusing on your own will, but focusing on the will of God. And included within that meant service to everyone. Jesus on multiple occasions would find himself in a position of service. In fact, one of the last places in which he finds himself is in a position of washing the disciples' feet, the ultimate form of service in their day. And yet the Messiah, the one who was God in the flesh, the man, or the God who had become or taken on the form of man, lived a perfect sinless life, who was going to die on the cross for our sins, was washing the feet of those who were his disciples, who were his followers. The very idea of arrogance should be the exact opposite of the mindset of the Christian at all times. To have arrogance is to completely disregard other people's feelings or their rights. This one is difficult at times. We like to think about ourselves. Maybe even, we might say, well, I'm a selfless person because I take care of my spouse or my children or my loved ones. But does it extend past that? Do the needs of maybe those who are unloved by many or outcast by many, do their emotions or their rights or their feelings take precedent or take a position of power within your life, or do you simply ignore these things? That is, in fact, a form of arrogance. When it comes to boasting, this is setting forth one's own talents or possessions and actions as a superior action or possession or talent than another one's. So the arrogance is, I place my emotions as more important than your emotions, or my rights as more important than your rights. Boasting is similar in that mine is above yours, but this is maybe my possessions or my abilities. My talents are more important than your talents are. And I do this in a flaunting way. Interestingly enough, boasting and arrogance both are very visible. Pride itself can be very visible, but it can also be something that is kept inwardly and not expressed. Many people can be arrogant without ever showing that they are arrogant. Many people can be boastful without ever showing that they are boastful. You might not ever say, well, I am better at this and that than you, but you might think it. And even thinking it can be a dangerous route to go down. As far as self-righteousness is concerned, self-righteousness is assuming that our conduct or our ideas or our lifestyles are better because they stem from ourselves. Any of y'all ever struggle with this? This idea is better, not because it's a better idea, but because it's my idea. You ever have that? You ever have that thing? We have that a lot, even within our own personal lives. This is the right idea. Why? Not because it's the right idea, but because it was my idea. And this is a sense of self-righteousness. Now, I will remind ourselves of this. If you're looking at these things and going, okay, I'm 3 for 3 so far, there's no chance for me, remind ourselves that one of the purposes of this study itself is to not only point out maybe some difficulties that we face, but even point out some ways in which we can overcome these things. Hey, this is difficult for me. This is a struggle for me. I want to be righteous in the sight of God, so I'm going to do what it takes to overcome these things. So if you're 3 for 3 so far, don't go, okay, there's no hope for me. Simply focus on the ways in which we can improve. And of course, haughtiness, the last of these 4 instances of holding of high esteem of oneself or putting more value or worth within oneself. Haughtiness is to assume that we are essentially more valuable because of our position that we hold within society. For instance, royalty or movie stars. Because I hold this position, I'm therefore more valuable because of it. And haughtiness can be seen kind of overlapping in each of these instances. Haughtiness can be seen in arrogance. Because one is maybe haughty because of the position that they're in, they feel as if their feelings are more validated or their feelings are of more importance than mine. Boasting in that my talents are better than yours. And then, of course, with the self-righteousness side of things as well, my ideas are better than yours. You'll notice that where one of these is present, often the others are present as well. Pride isn't something that normally kind of works in teeny little bits. Typically, these are all together. When I place a sense of greater value upon myself or exalt myself into a position in my own mind, each of these things seem to take place within my heart as well. There are other negative expressions of pride, like condescension or self-centeredness. But really, we kind of get the idea with these 4. Pride simply expresses itself, first of all, as me being of more value than the next being. Not necessarily showing or pointing to the value of others in any capacity, but rather simply pointing to myself as being much more valuable. The second way in which pride is expressed, or the second way in which we see pride, is when we measure our worth by the things in which we possess or the things in which we own. John calls this boastful pride of life in 1 John 2:16. Whether this be a house or a car, an education, a name, or a group that we belong to, we feel superior because of what we possess. Another word for this type of pride is status or class. You would be surprised with how much of what we do in our modern society, whether we do it intentionally or not, is based on this mindset. I had an instructor in school, and he had multiple degrees, had a PhD, this, that, and the other. Had spent way more time in school than I would ever intend to. And he said, "You want to know what my favorite thing to do with my degrees is?" And he says, "When I get one in, I go sit at my desk, I breathe the sigh of relief that I got it, and I put it in a drawer and shut it." And he said, "Because it's not worth anything. It's not anything but the knowledge. It does not make me some better than somebody else kind of person. It does not increase my value to somebody else. It's simply a tool in which I now possess to go and do further work of the Lord. Not something to be boastful about, but rather something to be humble that I was able to possess and then use to go and share the gospel with others." One of the interesting things about this measuring of our wealth by what we own is this is really the major focus of advertising. When you look at maybe car commercials, what's one of the things that they might say in car commercials? This puts you at a step above, or this is head turning, eye opening, or maybe this certain set of clothing, or this handbag, or this gun makes you a better hunter. It makes you a better fisher. It makes you look better. It makes you to be more of an eye candy for others. This is the main focus of people who are trying to sell you something, which should tell you something about maybe the focus itself. If my goal in life is to build a better version of myself so that I look good for others, not so that I am a better servant of Christ, then I am mistaken in thinking that my possessions hold any sort of value within life. It seems as if there was much to say in Scripture about the value of things of this earth, and maybe even some difficulties that face those who hold on to this value as something that is truly worth something. The approach from advertisers, as I mentioned, is such as this: cars, TVs, jeans, makeup, etc. That you possess will make you special. It'll make you unique. It'll make you better or smarter or cooler than those who do not possess these items. This is why some people will pay an extra 30% for a product with a particular emblem on it, not because it is simply a better product, but more so because of the pride of identification. I'm wearing this brand. That brand shows forth a certain status that makes me to be seen in a better light. We assume at times a special status by associating with somebody famous or owning something that makes us better than somehow those who do not possess these things. That within itself is a form of pride. If there's one thing that I think has plagued our nation so greatly since World War II, it is probably the placing of value of oneself with the abundance of possessions that one has. I can't remember the exact number. I want to say it was like somewhere in the ballpark of 100 to 120,000 items on the average American owns. Now that includes, like, if you own 10 forks, that's 10. That's not you own forks, that's one. No, it's 10. But the average American owns on average 100,000 items. That's ridiculous. In fact, one of the major industries within our country is self-storage, storage of excess. I think it's 4 square foot per U.S. citizen of available storage in America. That's how much excess we have. Not of what we have within our homes, of storage units that are available. 4 square foot per citizen, and growing every single day. We take pride in our stuff. This is something that I struggle with. This is something that many in our generation struggle with. We like our stuff. We take pride in our stuff. That's why I try not to be too harsh on the rich young ruler when I see the command for him to go and sell all that he has and give it to the poor. That would be a tough command for me. That would be a testing of my faith. That might be one of those situations where I find myself, all that I have, I can get rid of a lot of what I have, but all that I have. That might be some difficulty. And I think each of us even struggle with that at times. We like our things. And yet our things do not go with us. I'll never forget one of mine, I want to say it was one of my instructors, had showed us a picture of a hearse pulling a U-Haul, which has forever ruined the preacher's analogy. If you never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul, well, apparently it happened once, and so it ruins the analogy. But we don't take these things with us. You look back in history, you look at the Egyptians would be buried with all their possessions, with all their gold. They would even have some of their servants killed and embalmed next to them, or mummified next to them. So those servants would go. We don't take stuff with us. Everything that we have is simply a worldly possession, and we need to be able to move past these things. Now, if that commandment was given to all of us, tonight, what we have to do is we got to go home. We got to sell all that we have. We have to give everything to the poor. I would dare say that would probably be something very difficult for each of us to do. But that maybe is a good measure for where our heart is. That if our pride is so strong that we take a great deal of self-worth in the amount of possessions that we have, then maybe we should rethink our self-worth. Or maybe we should rethink what we put our focus on would be a better way of saying that. Correct. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's not the possession itself. Jesus had possessions. It's not in the possessing of. In fact, you got this mindset of getting rid of everything completely. That was, from what we can see, only commanded of one man, and that was because of his love of those possessions with the rich young ruler. That's not necessarily a command given unto everybody. In fact, it was, from what I can tell, was only given unto one man because of his love. However, it should tell us about maybe the value that it has within our lives. If I'm so prideful that I think this makes me more valuable because I own it, then maybe I should get rid of it. A good little test for that is if there is an item that's like that within your life, go sell it. Get rid of it. You might say, well, hey, that's my car. What am I going to do? Okay, drive a bike or ride a bike. No, I don't know. Get rid of something that you hold of great value within your life and use that money to help somebody else. And that will humble you very quickly, and that'll make you also question what you really, really care about. Be like, oh, I don't really like that much. I can keep that, even though it might be your prized possession. For me, it's. I'll be honest with you. It's my laptop. I use it under the guise of it's for work. It'd be tough for me to get rid of my laptop. It really would, because I use it for so much. But it's difficult, And if it came down to it, it's like, hey, could you get rid of this for your relationship with Christ? Yeah. And I hope that would be an easy yes. But I also, at the same time, I do appreciate its abilities. So I hope that's not the requirement. But if I hold it of such high esteem that it makes me to be too prideful, then yes, I do need to remove that from my life. One of the other things that was mentioned as far as being pride is seen also as self-sufficiency. I will be honest with you. This one is the one that hits me the hardest. I am prideful in the sense that I like to do things myself. Now, you might go, okay, well, that's a good trait to have, that, you're self-sufficient. Yes, but you can be self-sufficient to a fault. If I'm not relying upon God for anything, that means that I'm thinking within my own mind, I know better how to handle this situation than God does. I have a greater understanding of how to overcome this thing than God does. And that's when it becomes sinful. This type of pride exists in those who feel or believe that they are sufficient unto themselves. These are the people who believe that they and they alone control their own lives. And whatever they have or have achieved is a result of their own efforts. They describe themselves as self-made people, and they take pride in their accomplishments and agonize over their defeats. These are the ones that Paul refers to in Romans chapter 1 and verse 22 when he says, professing to be wise. You'll also see phrases like wise within their own eyes. This type of pride begins with self as the center of the universe and measures all other things within context of that self-centeredness. It begins to affect not only the efficiency of one, but also one's self-sufficiency within their own hearts. There may be other types of proud behavior, but they can easily be fitted into one of these three categories: exaggerated self-worth, elevated status derived from the possession of things, and the desire to be totally self-sufficient. Let's talk about this as being, in fact, a sin. When we look at the sin of pride, we need to understand that these things are not just, okay, this is something we might need to fix. These things are sinful. They're wrong. If I were to point out a specific thing within your life and say, this is sin, this is what is separating you from God, this might be the thing that ultimately drives you away from your focus with God, then I need to fix it. So we need to recognize that these things are, in fact, sinful. These things are, what we described at least, is kind of a general looking at these things, but let's consider some of the reasons as to maybe why these are sinful. One of the main reasons is the exaggerated sense of worth. When we exaggerate our true value, we're guilty of lying about ourselves. Pride, in this sense, is a delusion about self and who we really are. The false sense of self begins within our own hearts. Mark chapter 7, verses 21 and 22. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, and foolishness. Isaiah even would say that the root of pride is the desire to leave our place beneath the sovereignty of God and to rise into a new and higher place, putting even ourselves above Him. Isaiah 14, verses 12 through 16. Paul says that this sin is so pervasive and that it infiltrates everyone's heart to some degree or another. 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 7. It is the evil thought that somehow we are better than God sees us as, or for those who do not believe in God, better because of the value that we place on ourselves. It is this thought within our hearts that drives us to arrogance, boasting, self-righteousness, and haughtiness. So the pride within ourselves is evil and wicked. Why? Because it says, I am of greater value than maybe even of God to me. I know better than God does. You know, when we think about, I'll never forget, I will never forget, as long as I live. My father said it to me so many times that I don't think I'll ever be capable of forgetting it. He would often say when me or Reese would get in trouble, he would say, I have been 13 before, you've never been 35. I don't know what the age gap was, I can't remember. But I've been there. I've been in that position, but you have never been in my position. So if there's somebody who understands how to overcome the situation, who do you think it would be? The person who's experiencing it for the first time, or the person who has already overcome it? When we look at ourselves as being the answer to every question, or that we ourselves are far more capable than anything, including God, to overcome things, we place ourselves in the position where say, I, even in the face of this difficulty, have a better understanding or am more capable of overcoming it than even God could direct me. And we might not do this in a direct way. We might not say, I might not wake up in the morning, face a difficulty and say, you know what, I'm better than God at figuring this out. But we might not turn to Him in those situations. It might not be the direct sense in which we scoff at God and think that we're better, but it might be within our lack of action. I didn't pray to God in this situation because I think I'm far more capable of overcoming it without Him than with Him. And I think that is reflected maybe within our prayer lives as well, that if we feel as if we are capable of overcoming this without God, then we see no desire, no need to turn unto God in those situations, which of course is another difficulty within our relationship with God within itself. Not just within pride within possessions, but within self, but also pride within possessions. When it comes to pride based on the value of our possessions, this is simply seen as idolatry. It's easy for us to paint pictures of idolatry within the Old Law or the Old Testament because we say, okay, they built a golden calf. And when Moses returns from receiving the Ten Commandments, he comes to find the people of Israel worshiping a golden calf. That's idolatry. Well, yes, that is idolatry. But what is also idolatry is placing value upon something that is far greater in value maybe than even your relationship with God. And so it within itself is a form of idolatry. When we draw our value or our personal worth from the things that we own, we are giving to those things the credit for who we are. This is a form of worship. If a person does this, he is investing his hope or his self-worth or his value in something else other than God. The worship of an idol is not only confined to bowing down before the statue or an image, it also includes making gods out of things that we acquire or pursue by thinking that they can some way make us better or happy. I've used this illustration before, but I think it's the timeless illustration, at least in my mind. If you ever get the Sears catalog when y'all were growing up, you know, mine was like I had edited a book when I got done with it. There was a circle almost on every page. You get the little thing in, you're getting ready for Christmas. I noticed the other day, we were at Mema's and they had gotten one from Amazon and Walmart, which I guess are becoming the new things to replace that, filled with toys, which is the most devious thing to ever send to a home, is a book filled with toys for kids to look at and say, I want. We get like that at times. You know, how many times did we growing up we couldn't live without this thing? And we finally get it, and it brings us the most joy and the most happiness, and nothing could ever go wrong in your lives after possessing that thing, and then 2 weeks later it's out in the rain. You know, 2 weeks later it's lost in the creek, or accidentally thrown away, or left at a pew at church, or fell between the seats and never to be seen again. We're like that as kids, and we think that we grow out of those things, but we're still like that. You know, we see a new car and we like, oh, that's a nicer car than I have. Maybe that new car will make me happy. A bigger house or more possessions. These things bring me happiness. When in your childhood did you ever find true happiness in a thing like that? For me, I'll never forget, I always wanted, there was this really cool Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles pizza van that you could fold out, and you had all the action figures, and man, I got it. I love that thing. I have no idea where that is today. There was nothing more on my mind in the month of December, probably back in 2007, than that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle pizza van. It's probably in a landfill. It has no real value to me It brought me no true happiness. And we see that as foolishness in children, but yet we still practice it as adults. We still seek after happiness in possessions rather than happiness in God. The psalmist said in Psalm 52 in verse 7, "Here is the man who did not make God his strength, but rather he trusted in the abundance of his riches and strengthened himself in his own wickedness," or the NASB here says, in his evil desire. We can derive satisfaction from our accomplishments and from our possessions. This is normal. But when these things become the reason that we think that we are better than others, or maybe the reason in which we are seeking these things out is simply to find joy within life, then our pride has become a difficulty and has entered into our hearts as something that is evil and wicked and sinful. Pride is also not just in the value of oneself. It's not only in the value of possessions, but it is in self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency is a type of pride that is most condemned in the Bible because the sin inherent in this type of attitude is that of denying God and His power over us. Exaggerating our worth or elevating our worth through these things, these are the sins that are committed with the knowledge of God. Self-sufficiency, however, is that I don't need God. There is no God. There is only me. As far as my world is concerned, I am God. This dangerous sin is condemned vigorously throughout the Scriptures. For example, Job 37 verse 24. Again, that's Job 37:24. "Therefore men fear him. He shows no partiality to any who are wise of the heart," within their own hearts. Psalm 10 and verse 4. Again, that's Psalm 10 and verse 4. "The wicked in his proud countenance does not seek God. God is in none of his thoughts." Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16 and 17. Proverbs 6, 16 through 17. "These 6 things the Lord hates, yes, 7 are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood," so on and so forth. Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 12. Proverbs 30 and verse 12. "There is a generation that is pure within its own eyes, yet is not washed from its filthiness." 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 12. 1 Corinthians 10:12. "Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed, unlest he fall." Or 1 John 1 and verse 8. Again, that's 1 John 1 and verse 8. "If we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us." To think that our position, our talent, our health, or our very existence are somehow achieved apart from God is both sinful and disrespectful, as well as a sign of ingratitude. To think that goodness is sufficient to stand before God is both spiritual ignorance as well as boldness. To think that we don't need God every moment for everything is the height of spiritual blindness, from which few ever truly recover. This is why the sin of pride is so dangerous, because the neglect of pride means the separation from man and God. The separation from man and God means destruction. So, Kase, what do we do about it? It's such a problem. It's such a difficulty. It affects so many people. How do we overcome it? Well, within the different ways in which we can look at it, let's kind of look at the problem, and it provides for us also the answer. One of the ways in which we can deal with pride is to understand that we need to not exaggerate our sense of worth. If it is the case that we value ourselves too highly, then maybe we should take a moment to humble ourselves or see ourselves as lesser. If it is the case that we seek after the pride of possessions, maybe we should either get rid of those possessions or truly begin to understand that those possessions are not fit for our value. And maybe even that self-sufficiency, instead of relying upon self, we rather turn to God for our true value. For dealing with the exaggerated sense of worth, many times when we do these things or say these things, we don't necessarily intend fully to raise ourselves up or to come as before God in a sinful way. However, we do these things sometimes without even noticing it. For instance, Solomon says that it is foolish to brag to others about ourselves because they often see our discrepancies between what we are saying and what we truly are. Proverbs 25 and verse 7. "It is better," he says, "to let another praise us, since there will be a more legitimate assessment of our worth." Proverbs 27 and verse 2. In another proverb, Proverbs 11 and verse 2, he says that pride, contrary to our opinion, brings dishonor and not honor upon the person. So the very same thing that leads us to place a sense of greater worth upon ourselves is the very same thing that actually decreases our worth. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 3, Paul tells Christians not to think of themselves, as we mentioned, not to think of themselves more highly than they ought to. In other words, that we should have an estimate of ourselves, but it should only be in line with reality. We should think no more or no less than what we really are. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 18, Paul truly gets this issue of self-worth into perspective when he says, "For it is not he who condemns himself that is approved, but he whom the Lord commends." In other words, if the Lord approves of you, you are as worthy and of value as any Christian or anyone who has ever come before you. As a matter of fact, for the Christian, the only legitimate boasting is to boast about what Christ has accomplished within you. For instance, Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 9, "Therefore most gladly I would rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me." So if boasting and bragging is the form of pride that you struggle with, remember that others are not very impressed by it. And not only that, but the only true legitimate way to boast is how much Christ has done through you. Instead of saying, "This is how valuable I am to the kingdom of God," talk about how valuable the kingdom of God is unto you. Instead of saying, I am the best at this or at that, say, "This is the ways in which maybe I need to work," or the things in which I struggle with the most, in which God truly shines forth in my life. If it is, in fact, the pride of life or the pride of possessions, for instance, in our nation, this form of pride is probably one of the most prevalent. We live in a very materialistic society. We're pressured to not only judge, but also to value others based on what they wear, drive, or where they live, or how powerful they may be within their positions. We cannot lead the society. We cannot go and live in a cave or a monastery. In fact, Jesus said that we lived in the world, but must not be of the world. How then can we live in a world that is filled with this kind of pride, but yet do not possess it ourselves? Well, we do it by keeping our priorities in order. This is why Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 33, "Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all of these things will be added unto you." This order requires you to seek first the things that are spiritual within their nature. This would include, of course, God's will, God's work, and God's purpose for your life. When these are the first priority within your life, God promises to provide in His own way the things in which you need. In other words, do not work for the things, but rather pray for the things and not be anxious for the things. Instead, we should work for Him, pray for the knowledge of His will, be anxious to do what is right within His eyes, and He will provide for the things in which we need. If you have the struggle of the sin of pride as far as self-sufficiency is concerned, how do I overcome valuing my own ability to overcome things greater than that of God? First, understand that He warns those who do such. For example, Psalm 49 and verse 11, it says, "For He sees what even the wise and self-sufficient men die." Or Matthew 23 and verse 12, it reads, "Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted." Through this word, or through His word and His people, God warns the danger of this sin, and this danger leads to death and destruction if not repented of, or if simply ignored. He also not only warns them, but He also disciples them to help to overcome the sin of self-sufficiency. Sometimes God breaks a person down through trials or sorrows so that that person will learn to lean upon God. For example, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, went mad for several years before he regained his sanity and finally acknowledged God. For another example, we can also see the Apostle Paul, who was given a physical limitation so that he could more closely depend on God. We talked about the thorn of the flesh. It's a whole thing. We talked about that in our ladies' class. To put it simply, Paul was able to see and witness things that no other man had seen and witnessed. And so Paul was given this infirmity not just so that he would have a bad day every now and then, but so that he would be humbled in knowing that he is nothing special, even though he was given this special opportunity. In the end, what God wants from us is to completely rely upon His Word, to rely upon His provision, to rely upon His timing and His mercy and His Son and His church in order to become whole and pleasing within His sight.
We lose our self-sufficient streak of pride when we are often in His Word, often within prayer, patient that within His will being done, kind and generous towards others, placing them before self, and following His Son and serving His church. When this is our lifestyle, we have learned to die to self and to live for Christ, and pride will no longer be our master. How do I overcome the sin of pride? By exaggerating my self-worth, by my pride within my possessions, or my pride within my self-sufficiency. I humble myself within His presence. I seek after His will. I no longer take value in the things in which I possess, but the things in which God has given unto me. And only then can I truly overcome the sin of pride. If you got questions or comments, wait till Sunday because they're about to break down the doors. I'm sorry I didn't give y'all more time. I was trying to get through that last section because it was just such good stuff. I didn't want to miss it. But if you got any questions or comments, save them for Sunday, and we'll try and get to them. And if I don't, somebody point it out to me and tell me, hey, go back and give people time to talk. Thank you.